to the first episode of PhD Wisdom Bombs with Judith. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a postdoctoral researcher in biomedical engineering currently. So I've been in the graduate school during a PhD and seeing how people struggle with the PhD journey, and this is my attempt to give a little bit of support in any way I can. And I must make a disclaimer, I'm not a mental health expert. I'm just a mental health advocate for graduate students. So if you're here and listening to me, and if there's something that I will say that's not quite correct, please feel free to correct me. This is all from personal experience and my own research that I'm speaking. So today's title is Slay That Burnout Monster. And the reason I selected this as the first topic for this series of podcasts is because that burnout is a real issue among the PhD students. Recently I conducted a small Twitter poll. It ended up being a bigger Twitter poll because I got over 2,000 votes. And the reason I did this was I wanted to figure out why procrastination is so common among the graduate student population. And a whopping 70%, 69% of the replies were that work feels overwhelming. The other choices were because I'm just tired, I need more time to think, and other reasons. So almost 70% was telling that they were feeling overwhelming. And if you look at the definition of burnout, burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. And the reason that the term prolonged is important here is because of the duration of PhD studies. Usually this spans from roughly 3.5 to even 8 to 10 years. So the more prolonged stress you have, the more it leads to burnout. And burnout is not just a mental exhaustion, it's also physical exhaustion. And PhD students tend to forget that they have a personal life. And it is kind of a problem with the culture that the overworking is extremely glorified by advisors and by the culture itself. And that leads to this really unrealistic expectations that you put on yourself and also other people put on you. So there is a point where people need to understand where you need to draw the line. And most of the time in the beginning of a graduate school program, we are there trying to prove ourselves, to show that we're good enough. And that also relates to another thing that's called imposter syndrome, and I hope to talk about it in the future. But for now, that level of commitment that students show from the very beginning, and you keep going at that pace, you are really asking to be burnt out, because you cannot sustain that level of work, that level of speed for a very long time at the same speed. So it's important that we try to strategically slay this monster. One way to do this is to understand what are your expectations, and what are your advisor's expectations, and what are the expectations of the program. So obviously there are going to be requirements that you really need to fulfill. Those are the musts, and those take the priority. At the same time, for example, in STEM fields, it's really important to publish and publish more in high impact journals sometimes. So you have this added pressure of trying to publish, do research. So it adds to the coursework and everything. It's important to understand how you would prioritize this work. What's expected of you? Set very specific goals. I'm telling you this by my experience and the things I wish I knew while I was doing my PhD. So it's very important to clarify some of these details from the get-go. Ask your advisor and try to clarify what are your expectations at the 2-year goal mark. What are your expectations when I'm doing my candidacy exam or the qualifying exams? What would you think is a good number of papers that we can realistically publish within this amount of time? If you set these clearly defined goalposts, it's easier to achieve them without completely exhausting yourself to achieve more and more always. So that's one. The other thing is that you set very firm boundaries, especially between your research work and your personal time. And this is a mistake that I did myself. My work was always spilling into my personal time. And in graduate school, you feel like you really don't have a personal life. You have to devote your whole entire time to your PhD thesis. That's not true, and that's not sustainable. And a lot of the really good PhD work that people do, they don't do it that way. And maybe there are some people who are inherently very hardworking and that's their nature. For them it works, but it doesn't work for everybody, and this is something that we need to understand and personalize your journey. Not 2 PhDs are equal. Every PhD is unique in itself and it fits the way you want to do work and not someone else. So set your boundaries from the get-go. If your advisor wants you to work in the weekends, work overnight, or work unrealistic hours, you need to have that conversation. If it is really difficult to convince to them that this is not sustainable, you have options. Either you have to understand how you will manage it, or you actually need to look for other people to work with. Quite honestly, this is a very strong decision you'll have to make. And sometimes it's not really the advisors. This is the pressure you put on yourself. The pressure your peers put on yourself sometimes. If you see majority of your department students working in odd hours, coming in during the weekends, you are going to be pressured to do the same thing. But it's important to understand that maybe they require more time to do their work. Maybe they have experiments that are scheduled and that requires them to come at an odd hour. You have to understand everything with the context. For example, if someone's doing cell culture studies, they might have to come back at an odd hour because they're depending on another live organism, and you have to do that. And for me, for example, we had to go to national labs, and sometimes when you go to a national lab, you have a defined time period where you have to do your experiment, and during that time you have to get your work done. So at that time you will have to work odd hours, and that's completely understandable. But the problem comes with burnout is that if you try to sustain these unrealistic expectations, you cannot work 14-16 hours every day, 7 days a week. That's not possible. So you have to understand that it's important that you prioritize your rest, your sleep, your nutrition, health, So take some time to think about it and really allocate those hours separately and set your boundaries firm. Another thing is that you might feel pressured, or this is the pressure you put on yourself, that you have to reply to emails very quickly, you have to finish some work whenever it's assigned to you right away. So these are pressures sometimes you put on top of yourself. So think about whether it's really necessary at that hour and allocate time wisely. So I came across this really good researcher who's done a lot of work on the topic of burnout, and specifically speaking in the graduate student health. Professor Hannah K. Allen. This was an article that is published this last year in the International Journal of Mental Health and Addiction, and they have seen that there is a very distinct correlation between the sleep, the amount of good sleep you get, and the burnout. So it is really important that you prioritize your rest. Please do so, and this will help you to reduce a little bit of the pressure that you put on yourself. If you're already at the verge of burnout, please seek help, and that's what helped me. You have to go to therapy. Seek help, and I'm sure all of these universities have their student health centers that will help you. Sometimes they are really overworked as well, but as far as I know, you can get a good results even from a couple of sessions. So make sure that you think about it. And the other thing is find people, reach out. This is something that people tend to not do when they're burned out. You completely disengage, and you have to tell yourself that this is what I'm probably going to do, and that's what I need to avoid. So find your cohort, find people who you can trust with your information, and talk to people and know how to do this, not just alone but with more people. So it's been a while that I tried to speak to you about the importance of tackling burnout. I know it's not easy, and it's a multifaceted problem, and one part of it is that you feel like you're not under control. It's not under your control, and that also leads to burnout, really. So when you feel this way, remember the things that you can actually control. Start there. It's kind of a vicious cycle when it comes to graduate school and the extreme stress level, because it's by default a high stress job, because of the reason being that you're at the edge of new innovation, discovery, new philosophy. You're trying to contribute to the world something that has not been done before. You're already in unknown territory regarding your work. If there are other pressures added on top of it, it's going to be quite difficult. And you already know that this is going to happen, because this is the culture, and we have to accept the truth for what it is. A lot of the people might go to a PhD program really excited about the work, but you forget that you also need to deal with the culture. And the culture right now has a lot of room to improve, and it will not improve unless we tackle it. So start with you. Make sure that you make your health a priority, set firm boundaries, and always reach out to people who will help you. The minute you feel you're not alone in this, it's half the battle won. This is very common among the graduate student population. Burnout, stress, anxiety. This is not just you. Know other people's journeys, know what they did to overcome certain situations, and apply that to your life, and that will help you to make your PhD journey much more worthwhile. So thank you for joining today. I'll see you soon.